What happened that night shocked an entire village, and no one could explain it. In the quiet hills of the Hebrides, in dimly lit chapels and hidden rooms, a spiritual fire began to burn, one that would ripple from remote islands to distant continents. They said revival was impossible until ordinary men and women, fueled by secret, relentless prayer, ignited a movement that transformed communities, challenged norms, and changed lives forever. From the fervent mission halls of Azusa Street to the valleys of Wales to the wind-swept cottages of Peggy and Christine Smith, the pattern was the same. Revival begins in secret. Before we journey into this hidden world of prayer and awakening, make sure to like if you believe in the power of faith. Subscribe for more untold stories that awaken the soul, and share this video so others may discover the spark that begins quietly but changes everything. The story of revival often begins quietly, in moments hidden from the public eye, yet its impact can echo across generations and continents. Few events illustrate this truth more profoundly than the Azusa Street Revival, which began in the heart of Los Angeles in the early 20th century. At first glance, the modest building at 312 Azusa Street was unremarkable, a small, run-down mission in a city bustling with ambition, industry, and social change. Yet within its walls, something extraordinary was stirring. A movement that would leave an indelible mark on the Christian world. The revival began with humble men and women, ordinary believers driven by an extraordinary passion for God. Among them was William J. Seymour, an African-American preacher whose deep faith and unwavering commitment to the Spirit drew people from all walks of life. What made Azusa remarkable was not grand buildings, eloquent speeches, or public acclaim. It was the secret intensity of prayer and devotion that fueled everything. Long before the revival spilled onto the streets, it was nurtured in quiet moments of personal communion with God, often behind closed doors. Seymour himself emphasized humility and persistence, encouraging participants to seek God earnestly, privately, and without seeking worldly recognition. The atmosphere at Azusa was electric yet intimate. People from different races, social classes, and backgrounds gathered together in worship, singing in voices raised not for human applause, but for divine encounter. What began as small, fervent prayer meetings soon transformed into nights of awe where people experienced spiritual manifestations, speaking in tongues, prophecy, and healing. Observers described the meetings as chaotic, even shocking, yet there was a sense of divine order, as if the Holy Spirit were orchestrating every utterance and movement. The revival did not demand large audiences or press coverage. Instead, it spread like fire through the hearts of those willing to seek God privately, demonstrating that true revival begins in secret before it can transform the world. Behind the extraordinary spiritual displays were countless personal moments of dedication. Individuals woke early, prayed late into the night, and spent hours in silent reflection and intercession. The Azusa Street Revival was powered as much by hidden acts of devotion as by public manifestations. People prayed for strangers, wrote letters of encouragement, and sought God in the stillness of their rooms. These private encounters with the divine laid the foundation for the movement's explosive growth. Without this hidden, disciplined spiritual life, the revival would have remained a brief flicker rather than the worldwide phenomenon it became. Stories from Azusa reveal a tapestry of human vulnerability and divine intervention. One woman recounted kneeling alone in her tiny apartment, crying out for God's presence, only to be overwhelmed the next day by a tangible sense of holiness when she joined the mission's prayer circle. Another man described moments of deep conviction in solitude, realizing that every external gift or spiritual experience depended on an internal willingness to surrender fully. These narratives underscore a key truth. Revival is not merely an event, it is a process of secret dedication, persistent prayer, and intimate encounters with God. The Azusa Street Revival also challenged societal norms. In an era marked by racial segregation and social inequality, the mission became a melting pot where barriers were dissolved by shared devotion. African Americans, whites, Latinos, and immigrants worshiped side by side, united not by social convention, but by a shared longing for the divine. Yet again, the power behind this unity was cultivated privately, through quiet prayers, disciplined study, and personal sacrifices. While the public witnessed the unity and manifestations, the hidden work of individual devotion had already laid the groundwork. As the revival gained momentum, people began to journey from neighboring towns and eventually from across the United States, drawn by stories of miraculous healings and spiritual renewal. Yet those who experienced the revival firsthand recognized that its secret source, private prayer, humble obedience, and intimate devotion, was the true engine behind the movement. What spread outwardly was a reflection of what had first grown in the hidden corners of hearts and rooms, away from the eyes of the world. The lessons from Azusa are clear. Revival does not start with grandeur, public spectacle, or recognition. It begins with individuals seeking God in secret, nurturing their faith, and laying a foundation that can withstand scrutiny, chaos, and skepticism. The flames ignited at Azusa did not vanish when attention waned. They traveled across oceans and generations, leaving a legacy of spiritual awakening that continues to inspire today. From the crowded mission halls of Los Angeles, our journey now moves across the Atlantic to a small, rugged nation that would soon experience its own quiet yet transformative revival. Wales, with its verdant hills, stone chapels, and deeply rooted prayer traditions, would carry forward the principles sown in Azusa. The story of secret revival unfolds further there, where whispers of spiritual awakening began in secluded rooms, chapel corners, and the hearts of those seeking God earnestly, quietly, and persistently. The news of Azusa Street did not remain confined to Los Angeles. Across the Atlantic, in the rolling hills and misty valleys of Wales, whispers of revival began to stir among believers who longed for something deeper, something transformative. Unlike the bustling streets of Los Angeles, Wales offered a quiet, introspective backdrop, a land of stone chapels, small villages, and centuries-old traditions of prayer. It was here, in these modest and often isolated settings, that the seeds of revival found fertile ground. The story begins with individuals who had heard of the extraordinary events in Azusa and felt an irresistible pull toward God. They were ordinary men and women, farmers, teachers, and tradespeople, whose lives were marked by daily toil and routine, yet whose hearts carried an extraordinary hunger for the divine. What made the Welsh awakening remarkable was that it did not erupt overnight in grand meetings. It began in hidden rooms, personal prayer sessions, and small gatherings, often unnoticed by the wider public. The revival's power lay not in spectacle, but in the unseen intensity of devotion. In towns like Cardiff, Wrexham, and Aberystwyth, believers began to meet quietly, sometimes in private homes, sometimes in small, dimly lit chapels. They came together to pray, not for recognition or social acclaim, but to seek God earnestly. These meetings were often spontaneous, fueled by a profound sense of longing for the Spirit. A woman would rise before dawn to pray in the corner of her kitchen, while a man might linger after work in the chapel, kneeling in solitude. These private acts of devotion, though seemingly insignificant, laid the groundwork for a movement that would soon sweep across the valleys of Wales. What struck many observers was the consistency and intensity of these hidden gatherings. Unlike the large public meetings of Azusa, the Welsh Revival thrived in secrecy. Letters and journals from the time reveal that participants spent hours in meditation, intercession, and fasting, often without the awareness of their neighbors. The personal, secret prayers of a few became the invisible engine driving a larger awakening. One diarist recalled, "We prayed in the stillness, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. Little did we know that the Spirit was moving powerfully among us, preparing hearts for what was to come." The Welsh Revival also reflected a remarkable cultural resonance. Wales had long been a land where chapel culture and spiritual discipline were intertwined with everyday life. Singing, hymnody, and personal devotion were part of the fabric of communities, yet what emerged during this period went far beyond tradition. There was a sense of urgency, a recognition that true revival was born in hidden devotion, cultivated quietly, patiently, and without public display. As in Azusa, the miraculous manifestations, spiritual gifts, healings, and transformation were the outward reflection of inward secret work. Small groups became the heart of the movement. In some instances, gatherings included only 2 or 3 people, meeting in a room lit by a single candle. They prayed for the sick, for their communities, and for the Spirit to move. Often, these individuals were dismissed or underestimated by the larger society, yet their devotion produced results far greater than anyone could have anticipated. When word eventually spread of healings and spiritual encounters, outsiders were astonished, but those involved knew the truth. The revival had grown in private long before it became visible to the world. The influence of Azusa was evident, not in the replication of spectacle, but in the principle of hidden spiritual labor. Leaders of the Welsh Revival encouraged participants to seek God in solitude, to cultivate personal prayer, and to prepare their hearts for the unseen workings of the Spirit. Public gatherings would come later, but they were sustained by the hidden, fervent devotion that had already taken root. In letters sent back to America, Welsh believers recounted moments of profound connection with God that occurred away from public view, echoing the very ethos of Azusa. Revival begins in secret, with the heart and soul fully surrendered. The Welsh Revival also highlighted the communal aspect of personal prayer. While individuals prayed in secret, there was a growing awareness that collective devotion amplified the movement. Small, secret gatherings often merged with others, forming networks of prayer that spanned villages and valleys. These networks were quiet, sometimes hidden from public notice, yet they allowed the revival to grow organically, rooted in intimate acts of faith. What outsiders saw as sudden and dramatic was in reality the cumulative result of countless private prayers and persistent devotion. By the time revival meetings gained wider attention, the groundwork had already been laid. Hearts had been prepared, spirits had been awakened, and communities were ready to receive what had been cultivated quietly over months, sometimes years. The Welsh awakening demonstrated a fundamental truth. Spiritual movements that transform society do so because of unseen personal labor in the inner life of believers. What appeared outwardly as sudden revival was actually the visible fruit of hidden, persistent prayer. As we leave the misty hills and quiet chapels of Wales, our journey continues to the remote Hebrides Islands, where the principle of personal devotion and secret prayer finds a new expression. Nurtured by women whose faith and dedication will leave an enduring legacy. The story of revival once again reminds us that what begins in secrecy can one day illuminate the world. As the spiritual fire spread from Azusa to Wales, the winds of revival traveled further still, reaching the remote Hebrides Islands off the coast of Scotland. Here, surrounded by rugged landscapes, turbulent seas, and small, scattered communities, the principles of hidden devotion and secret prayer found their purest expression. Unlike the bustling streets of Los Angeles or the valleys of Wales, the Hebrides offered isolation, simplicity, and silence, a setting uniquely suited to the cultivation of spiritual depth. Among the island's inhabitants, a quiet but profound awakening began to take shape. At the heart of this movement were two remarkable women, Peggy Smith and her sister, Christine. Both lived lives marked by discipline, humility, and fervent prayer, often unseen by the wider community. Their days were filled with ordinary tasks, mending, cooking, tending gardens, but interwoven with these duties was an extraordinary spiritual rhythm. They spent long hours in personal prayer, seeking God's presence with a sincerity that transformed their inner lives and eventually touched the lives of everyone around them. The Hebrides Revival was not born in public ceremonies or grand meetings. It began in the small corners of cottages, in quiet church vestries, and on wind-swept cliffs overlooking the sea. Peggy and Christine, along with a handful of devoted believers, would meet in these intimate spaces, praying for their families, neighbors, and communities. These prayers were fervent yet private, often carried out at dawn or late at night when the world was still and distractions were few. The sisters understood a principle that had echoed from Azusa and Wales. True revival is nurtured in secret before it manifests publicly. Historical accounts and personal testimonies reveal that the sisters' devotion had a subtle yet profound ripple effect. People would later recount experiences of sudden conviction, healing, or spiritual breakthrough that could be traced back to the quiet prayers of Peggy and Christine. The sisters themselves remained modest, attributing any movement of God not to their own efforts, but to the Spirit working through their humble acts of faith. Their lives exemplified the idea that the hidden labor of prayer can ignite public transformation, often without recognition or fanfare. The geographical isolation of the Hebrides played a significant role in shaping the revival. Communities were small and spread across islands, separated by narrow channels of water. The sisters' dedication, combined with the limited accessibility of these islands, created conditions for intense, uninterrupted personal devotion. People often traveled long distances to join in prayer meetings, yet even these gatherings were intentionally kept intimate and focused. Unlike urban revivals, where crowds might swell and chaos ensue, the Hebrides Revival relied on discipline, secrecy, and heartfelt devotion, demonstrating that spiritual power does not depend on size or spectacle. Peggy and Christine also cultivated networks of correspondence and encouragement, writing letters to other believers who were seeking God. Through these letters, they shared insights on prayer, faith, and surrender, extending the revival beyond the immediate islands while maintaining the emphasis on hidden devotion. Each note carried not just guidance, but an implicit reminder: the secret moments of prayer, reflection, and surrender are what ultimately fuel lasting spiritual awakening. The visible manifestations, the healings, conversions, and communal transformation were simply reflections of what had already been cultivated in private. Stories of the Hebrides Revival often highlight the sisters' sacrificial devotion. They would rise before dawn, pray for hours, and then attend to daily chores or minister quietly to neighbors. Theirs was a rhythm of life in which the extraordinary was interwoven with the ordinary, where mundane tasks became acts of worship and silent prayers carried immense spiritual weight. Observers described a palpable sense of presence in the rooms where they prayed, a quiet intensity that could not be fabricated, witnessed only by those who shared in these intimate moments of devotion. The movement gradually gained momentum. Small prayer circles multiplied, and more individuals began to experience personal spiritual awakenings. Yet the revival retained its character, intimate, heartfelt, and grounded in secrecy. Public gatherings were modest and often simple, but they were imbued with the depth cultivated behind closed doors. People came not for spectacle, but for encounters with God, guided by the persistent prayer of those who had labored in hidden devotion for years. Peggy and Christine's legacy is a testament to a truth seen repeatedly in revival history, that true spiritual awakening is cultivated in secret, nurtured by personal prayer, humility, and unwavering faith. While the outer world may only see the results, the transformation of communities, the outpouring of joy, and the spread of revival, the foundation is invisible, composed of countless hidden moments of surrender and communion with God. As we reflect on the Hebrides, one principle becomes unmistakably clear. Whether in the bustling mission halls of Azusa, the stone chapels of Wales, or the wind-swept islands of Scotland, revival begins in the hearts and private prayers of ordinary individuals. It is not an event manufactured for public recognition, but a movement ignited in secret, sustained by faithful devotion. From this quiet intensity emerges a force capable of transforming communities and generations, reminding us that what God begins in secret one day will illuminate the world. Our journey now moves to the core lesson of all these awakenings, the secret power of personal prayer itself. Across continents in centuries, one unchanging principle emerges. The intimate, private communion with God is the engine behind revival, and understanding this secret can guide us today in cultivating spiritual transformation in our own lives. Throughout history, the thread connecting Azusa, Wales, and the Hebrides has been unmistakable. Revival begins in secret. The public manifestations, the crowds, the excitement, all are secondary to what quietly fuels spiritual awakening. At the heart of every revival lies personal prayer, a private communion with God that prepares hearts, ignites passion, and unleashes transformation that the world cannot fabricate or fully anticipate. In Azusa Street, the secret devotion of individuals like William Seymour and the early participants laid the foundation for what would become a global movement. Each night, long after the world slept, they knelt in humble rooms, seeking God not for fame, but for intimacy with the Spirit. These solitary encounters were intense, often accompanied by fasting, tears, and a profound sense of longing. What began in these private moments erupted into extraordinary public manifestations, speaking in tongues, prophecy, and healing. Yet the revival itself was birthed in the quiet, unseen dedication of ordinary believers, demonstrating that the hidden labor of prayer precedes visible spiritual impact. Across the ocean in Wales, similar principles were at work. The valleys and hills became silent incubators for awakening, where prayer was not a performance, but a commitment of the heart. Individuals would wake before dawn, light a candle, and pray in solitude. Small groups gathered in private homes or dim chapels, often unnoticed by neighbors, where the Spirit could move freely without distraction or expectation. The Welsh Revival reminds us that intimate, hidden devotion is more potent than public spectacle. Here, personal prayer was not a preliminary step, it was the revival itself, quietly transforming hearts and preparing the way for communal impact. In the Hebrides, Peggy and Christine Smith exemplified the power of secret devotion. Their lives illustrate that revival does not always require a stage, a crowd, or an audience. It requires consistency, humility, and perseverance in prayer. Rising before sunrise, praying late into the night, and interweaving their devotion into daily tasks, the sisters modeled a life where every moment became an opportunity for communion with God. Their hidden acts of faith rippled outward, touching the lives of neighbors, friends, and strangers. Each private prayer was a spark that fueled a flame which would eventually illuminate entire communities. What makes personal prayer so transformative is its intimacy and sincerity. Unlike public acts, where motives can be influenced by attention or recognition, secret prayer operates in a realm where the only audience is God. This freedom allows individuals to lay bare their hearts, confront doubt, surrender fears, and cultivate authenticity. In these moments, God shapes character, strengthens resolve, and plants seeds of revival that cannot be engineered through strategy or spectacle. Across the revivals of Azusa, Wales, and the Hebrides, the common denominator is clear. The visible outcomes of revival are the natural overflow of hidden, persistent prayer. Stories from these periods reveal the diversity and depth of personal prayer. In Azusa, people wept for hours, interceding for friends they would never meet or cities they would never visit. In Wales, individuals prayed silently in the morning mist, trusting that God was hearing them even when no human witness was present. In the Hebrides, Peggy and Christine whispered prayers into the quiet of their cottages, believing that every utterance mattered to God. These acts, while invisible to the public eye, carried immense spiritual weight, demonstrating that true revival is not measured by public recognition, but by the depth of personal devotion. Modern believers often overlook this principle, seeking revival in programs, events, or large gatherings. Yet the historical record teaches a different lesson. Personal, secret prayer is the engine behind all enduring revival. When hearts are fully surrendered, when individuals cultivate intimacy with God without expectation of reward, the Spirit moves in ways that surpass human planning. Revival is not an event to be manufactured, it is a process to be nurtured within the secret chambers of the heart. The secret of personal prayer also highlights the interconnectedness of believers across time and space. The principles that powered Azusa inspired Wales, and the same spiritual ethos took root in the Hebrides. Each revival was distinct in culture, location, and expression, yet all shared the common foundation of hidden devotion, private intercession, and intimate communion with God. The lesson is timeless. Revival is not an external phenomenon. It is the product of deeply personal encounters with the divine. As we reflect on these hidden patterns, a profound truth emerges. The world may witness the fruits of revival, the gatherings, the healings, the communal transformation, but it rarely sees the secret, patient labor that brought it to life. The individuals who devoted themselves in silence, who prayed without applause or acknowledgement, were the true architects of change. Understanding this principle is critical not only for historians and students of spiritual movements, but for anyone seeking authentic transformation today. Our journey through Azusa, Wales, and the Hebrides now prepares us to ask a crucial question. How can these lessons inform our lives today? The secret of personal prayer is not confined to history. It is alive and accessible to anyone willing to embrace it. In the final section, we will explore practical applications, showing how the principles that fueled historic revivals can ignite spiritual awakening in the modern world, encouraging each of us to cultivate our own hidden, transformative devotion. As we trace the journey from Azusa to Wales and the Hebrides, one truth becomes undeniable. Revival always begins in secret. The extraordinary movements of the past were not birthed by publicity, spectacle, or grand strategies. They were the fruit of private devotion, hidden prayer, and humble obedience. But the story does not end in history. These lessons are as relevant today as they were a century ago, calling each of us to examine how we might cultivate revival in our own lives, communities, and generations. First, the principle of personal prayer remains paramount. In an age of constant noise, social media, and public performance, the call to private, heartfelt communication with God has never been more radical or more essential. Just as William Seymour knelt in solitude at Azusa and Peggy and Christine prayed in the quiet of the Hebrides, we are invited to create sacred spaces in our own lives. Whether rising before dawn, retreating to a quiet room, or taking moments of reflection throughout the day, the practice of intentional, secret prayer sets the stage for spiritual transformation. The world may not witness these moments, yet they carry immense power, shaping hearts and preparing the way for movements far greater than we could imagine. Second, the legacy of secret revival teaches us that consistency and perseverance matter more than visibility or immediate results. In Wales, countless individuals spent months in prayer before any public manifestations were observed. They persisted in small acts of devotion, trusting that God's work cannot be rushed or forced. Today, this principle reminds us that spiritual growth, social transformation, or community renewal does not happen overnight. Hidden, repeated acts of faith, whether mentoring, interceding, or simply living with integrity, plant seeds that may bear fruit years or decades later. What appears slow or insignificant to the world may in fact be the invisible foundation of lasting impact. Third, the historical record underscores the power of ordinary individuals. None of the leaders of these revivals relied on extraordinary status or worldly credentials. They were farmers, teachers, sisters, neighbors, people willing to humble themselves before God in secret. The Hebrides Revival, led quietly by Peggy and Christine Smith, demonstrates that influence is not determined by public recognition, but by steadfast devotion. Today, this is a call to embrace our own spheres of influence, however small they may seem. Every act of hidden prayer, compassion, and encouragement has the potential to ignite transformation beyond our imagination. Fourth, these stories illuminate the interconnectedness of personal and communal revival. While revival begins in secret, it rarely remains isolated. The hidden prayers of a few create ripples that influence families, communities, and entire regions. Modern believers can take inspiration from this principle by understanding that private devotion does not exist in a vacuum. Moments of secret prayer, humble service, and faithful obedience can spark hope and renewal for those around us, often in ways we may never witness firsthand. The hidden labor becomes the engine that fuels broader spiritual awakening. Finally, the overarching lesson is one of hope and empowerment. If revival in Azusa, Wales, and the Hebrides could emerge from ordinary individuals devoted to secret prayer, then we too are capable of participating in spiritual renewal today. We are reminded that God honors sincerity, persistence, and humility, and that He can transform ordinary acts into extraordinary outcomes. Whether our focus is personal transformation, community impact, or global influence, the pathway remains the same. Seek God in secret, nurture your faith privately, and trust the Spirit to work through your hidden devotion. In practical terms, this might mean dedicating specific times each day to prayer or meditation, journaling reflections, fasting for spiritual clarity, or intentionally cultivating moments of stillness amid the busyness of life. It may also involve quietly mentoring, encouraging, or serving others without seeking recognition. Each of these acts mirrors the historical patterns seen in Azusa, Wales, and the Hebrides, demonstrating that the principles of revival are timeless and adaptable to every context, culture, and era. The challenge, however, is to embrace faith without immediate validation. In a world dominated by performance and visibility, the call to private devotion may feel countercultural, yet history teaches us that this is precisely where God chooses to move. The hidden prayers, the quiet acts of obedience, and the intimate moments of surrender carry immense power, far beyond what the world can see. True revival is cultivated in the unseen chambers of the heart before it is reflected outwardly in communities and movements. As we conclude this journey, the message is clear. Revival is not a distant historical phenomenon. It is alive, accessible, and waiting to be nurtured in the hearts of those willing to embrace the secret, disciplined life of prayer and devotion. From Azusa's crowded mission halls to the misty valleys of Wales and the windswept Hebrides Islands, the story remains the same. What begins in secret, sustained by faithful prayer, has the power to illuminate the world. And so, whether we are praying alone in our rooms, quietly serving our neighbors, or seeking God in the stillness of dawn, we participate in a legacy that spans continents and centuries. The flame of revival is not reserved for the extraordinary. It is ignited in ordinary lives, tended in secret, and carried forward by faith, persistence, and devotion. Today, we are invited to join that lineage, to embrace the hidden, and to trust that the Spirit will transform what begins in secrecy into a movement that touches hearts, communities, and generations yet to come. As we close this journey through hidden revivals, from Azusa's mission halls to the quiet valleys of Wales and the windswept Hebrides, remember this: the flame of revival begins in secret, and it can ignite in your life today. If this story moved you, if the hidden power of prayer and devotion has stirred your heart, don't let it stay unseen. Like the quiet prayers that sparked historic movements, your action can ripple farther than you imagine. Click like to honor the hidden seeds of faith. Subscribe to journey with us into stories that illuminate the unseen. Share this video so that others too may discover that revival begins quietly, but its impact can change the world.